Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Snobs podcast. It's your host, Matt Flynn. Today, I have the honor of speaking with Dustin Lebel. He's a strength and conditioning coach for BJJ athletes. I came about him through Instagram. I've been following him for a while. Just every now and then, I come across some of his posts, and I thought they were very insightful in terms of the information he was spousing on strength and conditioning for BJJ athletes. So I got him on, and that's what we kind of talked about. So you'll find at the start of the podcast, we kind of dive right into things. We did have some technical difficulties, so I ended up having to delete that out. So just recorded an intro so that we're not just jumping right into things. Um, Nothing else to add. I hope everyone enjoys this podcast, and I will stay tuned for more episodes to come. When you're first getting into BJJ and when you were incorporating that alongside your strength and conditioning, were you finding that it was just being too much and you're becoming too injured and too beat up, or what was kind of like how were things back in the day for you?
Yeah, so so I was recently promoted to purple belt a few weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you, but my path to that point has not been a linear path at all. My first jujitsu lesson was in 2003, to give you some context. So I was 18 years old. I did not take on to jujitsu as quickly. I gravitated more towards the striking arts, boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, some of the like JKD type concepts. Stuck with it on and off throughout those years. Got my blue belt. I got a little bit more serious in like the mid 2000s. Got my blue belt in 2009, 2010. Got injured. I tore my meniscus, had a bucket handle tear, had a partially torn ACL, and then I took about 10 years off. So when I started back up again 2 years ago, I was 36. And had not done any martial arts. I maybe took a class here and there because I thought I was going to get going again. And then I did one session and then stopped and, kind of convinced myself that it wasn't really for me. It wasn't going to fit my schedule, whatever the case might be. So when I started 2 years ago, I just committed and I said, you know what, I'm just going to show up however often I can, two to 3 days a week. And I'm just going to commit to just that. And I'm going to be as consistent as I can with that. And yes, when I first started, so back then, I mean, I was in my late teens, early 20s, mid 20s. My life was different. I didn't have kids. My work, I worked in a gym, but I was a mid 20s mid 20-year-old personal trainer with not a super busy schedule at the time. You know what I mean? And I literally made my work revolve around training. So my lifestyle was a lot different then. So I can't really recall, if I was necessarily beat up a lot back then, other than, having a few injuries. I tore my labrum in 2004 as well, doing jujitsu. So this time around, kind of coming back and knowing that, well, I'm older, I have a family. I can't afford to get injured in the sense that I enjoy training too much. I don't want to have to take 6 months off, a year off because I had to get another surgery. So um, to kind of tie in with your question, I decided to take the approach that I was going to try to train as smart as I could, meaning don't bite off more than I can chew within a single training session. Avoid getting into kind of the pissing matches that typically happen, especially at the lower belts, and just be cautious of my ability to recover between sessions. So, when I first started back up again, being a little bit older, having a little bit more on my plate, I was definitely like, I remember those first 3 to 6 months, especially, were like, a callousing period, if you will, of, going just twice a week. I remember being sore in places that I just haven't been so, I haven't felt that level of fatigue in a very long time because even, especially, I was a blue belt then. And even then I had years prior of experienced martial arts. Everybody says to relax and stay calm. And you think you're doing that, you're not doing that. Like you're not like until you kind of get those reps under your belt. Any white belt or blue belt who thinks they're just chilling out and they're going with the flow. They're not. They're generally being a spaz, and I was probably that spaz as well. So you get
Mhm.
you get fatigued very easily. You get sore in places you haven't been sore in a very long time. Um, Strength training probably takes a little bit of a backseat, or your ability to handle higher training loads outside of even just low volume jujitsu, like, are definitely compromised.
Hmm.
Um, so I definitely had to make some adjustments to my strength and conditioning, which over time, the more consistent you are, that definitely gets easier. Um, and I guess that's if I try to preach anything online, it's kind of the message of just being consistent. Kind of maybe starting with a more minimal effective dose. As much, people like to make fun of that because now, everybody and their mom is David Goggins now, and if you're not, going above and beyond, like, but as a mid 30s, non-athlete, really,
Hmm.
I try to just take the road of, maybe not the road less traveled, but just definitely the road that's going to lead me to less injury, less feeling like, I don't know if you swear on this podcast, but not feeling like
Yeah.
dog shit.
Hmm.
More days of the week than not, and
Yeah.
I want to be able to train tomorrow. Like, that's my, that's always my goal. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. So.
In that period from 2009 to 2020, where you weren't doing BJJ, were you still heavily involved in strength and conditioning and lifting?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And I've been working in the fitness industry in some capacity since 2005 or six. So
Okay.
I worked in a gym for 14, 15 years and had a variety of roles within there, and then left in 2018 to pursue more of an online coaching business.
Hmm.
COVID happened, and I had a son, and for a variety of reasons, kind of took one foot out of the fitness industry, and I have a job entirely not related to fitness, but it allows me to kind of sustain both, and I'm not in a rush to, you know, to do anything on that end. So to answer your question that you got to, um, which, can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I got lost in my own.
Well, I was asking about the training period. Like, have you
Oh yeah,
still
yeah,
been?
yeah. So yeah, so working in fitness and being like, I'm very passionate about strength conditioning, as I've experimented with a bunch of different training methodologies and trying different, competing in different things at a low level, but still competing. So before the hybrid thing was very popular and people, now everybody's a hybrid athlete and deadlifting 600 pounds and running 5-minute miles. And not that I could ever do that, but I hired a coach back in like 2014, kind of the guy who popularized hybrid training, now, Alex Viada. And, I worked with him for a long time, um, trying to get my mile time down and my deadlift up, that kind of thing.
How did that go for you with working with Alex? I've been following him for a while, and he's always putting out great information.
Yeah, I mean, this was, so 2014, I want to say, is when I hired him, and his business was well established at that point, but not complete human performance, not the juggernaut that it is now.
Hmm.
So working with him was great because he was still doing the programming. He was my coach. I made such great progress that I ultimately stopped training with him. And like, and in hindsight being 2020, I should have probably stuck with it, especially at the rate that I had back then. I think I was interested in other things at a certain point, but it was great. Like, I'm not a super athlete by any means, but I could deadlift almost 3 times my body weight. I could run a sub 6-minute mile and squat double body. Just those cool things that check off. Which, again, I'm not a super strong or super fit guy, but
Hmm.
um, looking back, I was like, actually, shit, I don't know if I could do some of those now. So, it's you never know when your last PR, when your last PR is your last PR. Not that I don't think those days are over. I'm just, looking back, it's like, oh man, like, I actually excelled with his programming and learned a lot from him in particular. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, so I worked with him. I did some CrossFit style stuff for a little bit too after that.
Yeah.
Um, Got into more endurance training. Like, I've dabbled in a little bit of everything. Um, just because I find it interesting. Probably have a little bit of training ADD, and probably make more progress, I'm sure, if I stuck to one thing. But ultimately, I like to enjoy the process and experiment and try new things. And I still have a stable of clients that I work with, and so I try things out to ultimately not necessarily that everything that I do is I'm going to impart on my clients, but you learn from experiences to some degree, especially as I think the longer you've been doing this. So I do like that aspect of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because to me, it sounds like you have like a vast array of tools that you can kind of pull from for programming purposes in terms of strength and conditioning. So today with you, I want to really just dive into what you think is best for a person like yourself, kind of the maybe mid-30s, limited on time, that wants to excel at BJJ but still incorporate some strength and conditioning into their life. So we can tackle this in any way you
Yeah.
want, but maybe let's start with the conditioning side of things. We can kind of talk about that and how you think is the best way to approach conditioning for the BJJ athlete.
Yeah. So I was thinking about some of this before we got on, just because I wanted to have some talking points. And
Yeah.
so the way I look at strength conditioning for jiu-jitsu athletes in particular, if you go into any academy and you're just sitting around with your classmate, your peers, and you're talking like, what do you do for strength conditioning? You're going to have like a third of the people or more who are, they kind of dabble. They do some because they know they should, kind of thing. But there's no real rhyme or reason to it. It's kind of like I go in, I bench press on Monday because Mondays are for bench pressing, and I don't really have any thought towards it. Or, I heard that doing interval training is supposed to be great for my cardio, but there's no thought process behind it, and there's no rationale behind why they're doing what they're doing or progressions involved or anything like that, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
one group. Then you have the group who are like, they're hardcore competitors. They do strength and conditioning strictly because they know it's going to make them a better competitor. So they're doing it almost out of they don't love, they're like a typical athlete in a sense. They don't love strength and conditioning maybe the way you and I do. They're going to do it because it's going to make them a better competitor and better on the mats, but begrudgingly so, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think you have the guys like you and I who kind of come from this training background where kind of geek out on programming and all the nuances that go into program design and periodization and yada yada yada. So I think to answer that question, it depends who you're talking to, right? And one of the things that I try to think of is like looking at like almost viewing strength conditioning as like a gap analysis or forming a gap analysis when you're looking at something like what's the lowest hanging fruit that is going to get that person from point A to point B from where they are currently on their journey, if you will.
Yep.
So if somebody has never done any low intensity cardiovascular conditioning, zone 2, low intensity steady state, whatever the verbiage that you want to use to describe that, that's probably outside of going to class and being consistent, learning how to pace and all of those factors that go into sport specific development,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be your low hanging fruit because it's not necessarily fatiguing. It's not going to take a ton of, especially early on, time necessarily because, yeah, volume is important for cardiovascular adaptations. But if you have done zero, you've done 0 minutes up to this point other than go on the mats, 60 to 90 minutes a week could be more than sufficient for gain, for those kind of gains early on.
Yep.
And then at the point, like, how do you progress that? How do how does a person know when they should add more? I would say you can look at obviously the metrics of whatever piece of cardiovascular equipment you're using. Are your watts going up on the bike? Are your
Mm-hmm.
is your heart rate staying the same? Your working heart rate, but you're now able to apply more, use more power or whatever the case is, or go at a faster pace, as well as health metrics. How is your resting heart rate? Your HRV, if you measure something like that, your blood pressure, whatever the case is. And use that as kind of your gauge. And also performance, that's subjective because athletes are very, especially jiu-jitsu, especially, I think can kind of go down this rabbit hole of like, they go by feel. Like I feel this way on the mats. And sometimes it may be true, maybe not, but that's how they feel, right? So you can prescribe whatever conditioning protocol you want. And I'm ultimately looking for feedback of like how do you actually feel when you're rolling, you know what I mean? Like, do
Mm-hmm.
you feel more recovered between rounds? Do you feel like you have that extra gear when during a scramble and you have to turn it up a notch, how about the day to day? Like, are you able to recover well from a hard training session that you maybe had the previous day, and you can go at it again the next day or the day after?
Mhm.
Taking those things into account, you know.
So would that be like the first thing you would kind of layer into someone's program if they're not kind of doing anything outside of BJJ technique and rolling classes? Is just some low level cardio?
Generally speaking, yes, because the
Hmm.
cost is so low.
Yeah.
If I have you do 60 to 90 minutes a week of low intensity cardiovascular training, and the worst case scenario is you lose 60 to 90 minutes of your week, for whatever. But I mean, there's a million ways to spend that time that are still, in my opinion, is still productive. While you're doing that kind of cardio,
Yeah.
but you're not losing out on anything. You're not going to risk overreaching or overtraining. It's not going to dip into your recovery for your jiu-jitsu sessions. If anything, it's only going to be a net positive, right? In terms of helping alter like parasympathetic tone, so you can actually like calm down and recover. And obviously, the other health benefits that go along with that, especially if somebody's middle aged, maybe jujitsu isn't their full time sport. I think it's a good idea. I have a hunch it's a good idea to learn how to incorporate strength and conditioning, because there's going to be times in your life where you can't get on the mats, and you're going to want to have that habit, right, of being able to train when you're not doing jujitsu. And I think that's another key to like that's been a key for my longevity personally, I feel.
Hmm.
And also I think it'll help anybody else that's willing to just put in that little bit of extra time, focus, and energy, into to doing so.
Definitely. Would you say that the technique classes or any aspect of jiu-jitsu in the class itself is kind of, would it be considered zone two, like the technique? Or
So that's where, like, in my opinion, the waters are kind of muddy there, because with
yeah.
jujitsu, there's a lot of isometric contractions. And it's not a cyclical sport. And yes, you're going to be breathing hard. Your heart rate might land you squarely in that zone. And like you mentioned, if it's more of a technical class where the intensity is low, you're able to maintain nasal breathing. Not that that's a prerequisite, but you could if you needed to, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, you're going to get that low level aerobic base. Now, do I think it's as good as, say, getting on a bike erg and just kind of flowing at that 75, 80, 85 RPMs and getting that consistent blood flow? Not necessarily. I think they're two different things. Having said that, if someone's like, I have 1 hour a week to train, I can't do anything else, but I love jujitsu, I'm going to say go to jujitsu. And you know what I mean? Get your training
Hmm.
volume in there, and we can worry about the other stuff later on.
Yeah. Okay, let's say that someone starts to incorporate that 60 to 90 minutes of the zone two, or whatever you want to call it, into their schedule. What would be like a next piece of conditioning that you might consider adding to kind of benefit them on the mats?
Yeah. So in that case, so I work with, so my instructor, I handle his strength and conditioning. And
Hmm.
he's been a high level competitor for a long time, 15 plus years. He's on the mats more than anybody I know. He's that high volume, 6 to 10 sessions a week, a lot of rolling. So for him, I don't prescribe any low intensity conditioning, because he is that guy. His volume of training is so high that he's hitting a lot of those kind of volume markers. That even though I'm kind of eating my words on what I just said, in that I would like him to get in some for just feeling good, and just general, like, for like GPP, right? General physical preparedness, and I think
Hmm.
it would help. But his time is limited, right?
Yeah.
So understanding his circumstances and kind of leading into your question here, I would move in. I have him doing quite a few like moderate intensity intervals, right? So more tempo style intervals where we're working in that like 70 to 80% effort range, not quite all out. I'm playing with work to rest ratios, more so from the basis of keeping it somewhat interesting. Not that there's a dramatic difference between doing a 15 seconds of work and 45 seconds of rest versus 1 minute of work and 1 minute. I don't think there's a huge difference in that over the long term, but just for the
Yeah.
sake of like and keeping engagement high. So I'll do
Yeah.
quite a bit of that. and then I will play with higher intensity stuff, but on a less frequent basis. This would be your 90+% effort, your zone, let's say zone 5 type efforts. Um, and I'll vary that from more of your like full or complete recovery type work, your alactic type sprint work,
Mm-hmm.
5 to 10, maybe a few more seconds than that on, and near full recovery off, right? Just to kind of get that gear. So if somebody is, let's say they train a lot and their style of jujitsu is particularly more relaxed, and they never really get into scrambles, they're never really getting that opportunity to really like turn it up. That would be a case where I might include something like that a little bit more frequently, because they're not touching on that during their roles. They're never really hitting that next gear, and
Mm-hmm.
now when it does happen, they're kind of like, oh shit, right? um, so I will incorporate some more of that, just because it's also not going to beat you up as bad either, especially with a complete recovery. What I don't tend to incorporate as much, or what I save for more infrequent bouts, is more of your like glycolytic incomplete recovery, where you're working really hard. You're not necessarily recovering completely between efforts,
Mm-hmm.
and you're relying more on that glycolytic system to kind of, replenish ATP and whatnot. So the problem with that is that we already get a lot of that in jujitsu. Even just a moderate effort roll is going to be fairly glycolytic in nature. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily want to hit that system a bunch of times in the same week. Uh,
Yeah.
Having said that, I think it's important to still touch on it once in a while,
Mm-hmm.
because just like I noted with the low intensity side, if you're never really kind of pushing that cyclical type modality, you're on an airdyne or biker or rower, and you could just go as hard as you can for 30 seconds. You have a predetermined amount of rest, and you can repeat that for however many rounds. Like, you're not going to get that when you roll. When you're rolling, it's more, you're working with another human being. So there's a lot of other factors involved. And so, if you're doing, let's say, a 5 minute round, one 5 minute round can go one way, but another 5 minute round can go a completely different way. And you're kind of getting this mixed bag of energy system development, if you will, versus sometimes I want you to train this particular thing. So if you're a competitor and you're going to a competition, I want you to have that. If anything, you want to be able to remember, like, okay, I've been there. I know what my output is at this type of pace. I know I can recover from this. It sucks, but here we are, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's an important quality to train, um,
Mm-hmm.
even if infrequently.
Would that be like I guess similar to like a VO2 max style workout
Yeah,
where you
correct. And there's different forms of that, and different interval
mm-hmm.
type or styles of intervals that you can get that same kind of training effect.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've ever done VO2 max style intervals, like a 3 minute on, 3 minute off, or something along those lines, and there's different
Mm-hmm.
ways of accumulating the same amount of workload. Like, you could do 30-90, anything to kind of spend time in that like 2 to 5 minutes of like suck, is going to kind of get the same effect. So again, you can play with different work to rest ratios, and kind of get the same result. But yeah, it's that same super high effort, uh, and it just demands so much out of you that if you're combining that with very demanding roles in the gym, competition style training, whatever that means for you and your gym, I think you're creating an environment that's very difficult to recover from, per my experience, and just on my estimation of just watching other people kind of go through that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I
So,
tend to do that more infrequently, I guess.
would you maybe incorporate when they have like a lull in training in the gym, or maybe near some sort of competition where they might need an additional session or
Yeah, yeah. So we know, those adaptations are going to happen fairly quickly.
yeah.
They're in a few weeks, you're going to kind of tap out at your ability to really push that extra X%, above where you currently are. So yeah, I'll
Mm-hmm.
use that type of stuff in more of a sharpening phase, right, where we're getting ready for competition. Um, or in a period of time where, like, hey, I'm not getting in the gym that much, in the jiu-jitsu gym, in the academy that much. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not getting super hard rolls in, or I'm really trying to work on being more technical. I'm slowing things down. Then it makes sense to maybe include that once a week or so. as a way to just kind of keep that system fresh, or even on a less free, every second or third week. I found that to be um, a pretty good a way to keep it in, so to speak, without totally draining draining the system, and it almost makes you want to do the session versus like dragging yourself through the session. I kind of
Hmm.
use that as a gauge for high intensity work. If somebody's like, I want to do that workout, I'm ready to attack what's on paper, and I want to do it better than last time, then you're ready to do the session. But I find if like you're really dragging ass, yeah, sometimes you got to push through. I get that. But
Hmm.
in my mind, if you don't have a competition coming up and you're just looking for long term like aerobic development, then I think you should want to attack those sessions. And
Hmm.
so putting them
Definitely.
maybe a little bit more infrequently, every 10 days, every 14 days, depending on how much you're rolling, every 21 days, I think is a nice sweet spot where a lot of
Hmm.
people can get a lot of benefits without like the burnout factor.
You'll get so much more out of it if you want to do it, right? You can put a lot more effort into it. It kind of reminds me of, you obviously follow Dr. Peter Attia or know of him, and
Yep,
like
yep.
like he recommends 1 or 2 VO2 max sessions a week, which I couldn't imagine doing indefinitely.
No.
Just destroy yourself. So would not be fun mentally, right?
Yeah, and it's like you can do that. Of course, anybody can do that, but like I would rather go, okay, for the next 4 to 6 weeks or however many weeks we're going to do this, and I want to see incremental improvements over that period of time. Like mentally, that's just a much easier task to handle, and people can kind of wrap their heads around that versus like, yeah, we're just gonna do this once a week indefinitely. Good luck. Like that sucks.
Yeah, 100%. Especially on the Airdyne or some
Oh
nasty two like
God,
that.
yeah,
In terms of, I'm going to kind of circle back to the tempo work
yeah.
that you have your instructor doing. What is the purpose of that style of training in your opinion?
Yeah, so I mean, if you go back and you check out like the old Charlie Francis literature, like he used to have his sprinters do, one day they were doing 90+% efforts, high effort sprints, full recovery, 10, 20 minutes between bouts, that kind of thing. And then on opposing days, he would have them do these tempo runs where, is that about 70, 75% effort, uh, moderate recovery periods in between. So you're kind of maintaining this, what would typically be like a zone 2 heart rate in between efforts. And the idea is just, again, I look at it as a slightly elevated intensity from typical zone 2, where you can accumulate a good amount of volume in perhaps a shorter period of time. I think that's one way to
Hmm.
look at it. The other way that Joel Jameson, who's kind of, he's become very popular. I mean, I got his book in 2009, but I feel like he's made his way to kind of the fitness mainstream, which is awesome because more people are talking about like actually intelligent conditioning. But, he uses tempo intervals as a way to kind of like get your nervous system kind of prepped and ready to go. You do, 10 to 20 relatively short bouts. Doesn't take a lot of time, doesn't take a lot of energy. Generally, you'll feel pretty good the day after.
Hmm.
And you've gotten this like mild stimulus that isn't totally crushing. And it's just a little bit of volume to kind of keep those things ticking along. Now, are you going to be, are you going to qualify for Kona doing tempo intervals? Absolutely not. You know what I mean? Or qualify for Boston doing tempo? No. But for our purposes of just developing, aerobic conditioning for both health and our ability to put out moderate effort levels on the mat and repeat those moderate effort levels over and over again, I think they're a pretty darn valuable tool. And again, there's a bunch of ways to make those intervals not boring each and every week and
Hmm.
still get the same training effect. They're short, you know what I mean? In terms of like, you're not spending an hour doing those.
Hmm.
Um, I'm one of those people, I can sit on a bike for an hour and do zone 2, but most people do not want to do that. So I don't necessarily prescribe that.
Hmm.
But if I can get you to do a warm up, 15 or 20 minutes of tempo and then of tempo intervals and then a quick cool down, and if you've accumulated 30 to 40 minutes without really thinking about it,
Hmm.
that's like a win for me and a win for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I've recently purchased the Morpheus app. So like
Uh-huh.
there was a time when I could do a bunch of zone 2, like hours of it at a time, like during when I used to do ultra marathons. But now it's like it's very I dread doing it So yeah, just having that ability to kind of just look at something and like throw in a little bit like mental stimulus while you're doing it can make it go by so much faster by changing the tempos and the intensities during the session.
Yeah. Yeah.
Makes it
No,
way
I
better.
think that's, again, I think, adherence is even for athletes, right? Even the most hardcore of athletes, like adherence is still, the number one predictor of success ultimately, right? So if you
Yeah.
hate doing it, you dread doing it, you're not going to do it, plain and simple. Now, obviously, it depends on your goal, right? You're not going
Hmm.
to put in, 2 hours of conditioning a week to run an ultra marathon. We all know that, but um, the dose required for a jujitsu athlete who's already spending multiple hours per week exercising in some fashion, it's perfect, and I think we can tick a bunch of boxes off with that.
Agreed. So I think we did a good job of kind of covering kind of the conditioning aspect. Let's transition over to more of the strength side of things.
Yeah,
Like, I think a good question to start with is how strong is strong enough for BJJ? Because it's definitely a lot of people talk about it.
yeah. I like this question, and you hear this is what you hear about all the time, right? People give very specific, like you should be able to squat X amount of your body weight or bench press X amount of your body weight or this many pull ups or whatever. And I don't think those things are wrong. I think standards they can be useful because it gives you a number to shoot for. And if somebody's very like numerically driven and they want to see that, then yeah, that's a cool like have that kind of as your goalpost. But ultimately, I think it depends on the person, right? Because we all have different leverages and anthropometrics, and what might be a big bench press for myself might be piddly for the guy who is like, his arms are like a foot long, and he bench presses and he moves the bar,
Hmm.
3 inches off his chest, and that's his lockout, right? So obviously, it all depends on the individual. However, strong is strong, and when you're rolling with somebody, when they're strong, and oftentimes it's not reflective of what they can do in the weight room almost at all. Yes, I think it helps, and I view strength training as, again, going back to the gap analysis. If somebody has a very serious gap in strength, they're getting pummeled in the room by guys lighter than them or girls lighter than them, whatever, or they've never touched weights before, and they're starting to feel like they're like, okay, like I'm not the strongest guy when I roll with other people. Then yes, we're going to focus on getting you stronger. But then anything outside of that point, and I'll answer your question in a moment, I think it's just like money in the bank, to where like my goal is to be in my 50s or 60s and to be able to still roll as competitively as I can with the young guys. So if I can continue to train and, whatever little bits and pieces I can kind of add on to my strength repertoire, if you will, like that's going to be a bonus for me because I'm not super competitive. I'm not worried about it taking away time on the mats or anything like that.
Hmm.
Um, Sorry.
It's
But
okay.
in terms of like what's strong enough, I don't have a great answer. And again, you know it when you see it. If you're somebody who is like you've been training in the gym and you already squat, I don't know, twice your body weight, you're strong enough. Like I don't know what to tell you. Like, should you try to improve it? I don't like, we all know that guy who like the first time they bench press, they put up like 225 for sets of like 10 or something, right? It's like, so that
We-
person is like a freak. So what I'm trying to say though, that guy has to put in way less effort to get his bench press from, let's say, I don't know, pick the number, 225 for 10 reps to 315 for 10 reps. It might happen in 6 months versus
Mhm.
like, I may never bench press 315 pounds no matter how much, like, no matter what I do for my training from here until the day I die, right?
Mhm.
So there's a cost to benefit ratio that I'm always concerned with. Like, what is the cost of putting that much effort into getting stronger versus the benefit? And
Mhm.
I think every person has to weigh that for themselves. If you're the big strong guy in your gym, but you're still like a spaz when you roll, or you're still like not quite, you're not building the technical skills required for you to get better, and you care about getting better in jujitsu, maybe you back off a little bit. You kind of do a minimal effective dose, whatever that means for you, and
Mhm.
you work on other aspects of your game. Um,
Mhm.
Having said that, I still think we should try to get strong and maintain that throughout our life for health reasons. Not only will it help you on the mats, but I view it as, again, this like investment for our future or my future, so that when I'm in my 50s and in my 60s, yeah, I might not be able to do pull-ups with X amount of body, X amount of weight hanging off my waist or anything, but I still have something in the bank, right? I'll still have this reserve left over. So I think that's a good idea.
Hmm.
Um, and again, everybody's numbers when they're looking at their training log is going to be a little bit different. But again, it's one of those things, when you feel it.
Yeah. I think you nailed it on the head. It's so important to look at each individual, right? Because some, like you said, some people they might just be able to step into the gym. First time they bench, they hit 225. Someone else, first time in the gym, they're only benching 95 pounds. So for
Right.
that person to get up to that 315-pound bench, they're gonna have to devote a lot of resources to getting stronger. And in that case, likely they're going to be taking a lot of other things away to acquire that 315 bench, which is going to have greater detriment to their athletic abilities.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's where strength can become like a big decrement for people that are trying to chase specific numbers, especially people who aren't built to be extremely strong.
Exactly. And I, it looks, it's great because it looks good on Instagram if you're really strong in the gym, that kind of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
it may not always translate to your ultimate goal. But if you're somebody who like I love powerlifting. I want to compete in powerlifting and I want to train jujitsu because that's just what I like to do and it's fun. Like in my opinion, have at it. Like no one's telling you what to do. I think it ultimately comes down to what are your preferences. Do you want to get better at jujitsu, and is that your ultimate goal, or is jujitsu more of a hobby and you do it for the social aspect, you do it for another form of exercise? Then that answer isn't, it's entirely different for that person. You know what I mean?
Yeah. In terms of BJJ, like obviously if someone's kind of interested in that hybrid model of powerlifting and BJJ, obviously they're going to kind of gear more towards the big three. But let's say that someone wants to be like the best BJJ competitor. What lifts are you going to be attacking in terms of building up strength in?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the answer is going to be pretty vanilla. Like I'm looking at your basic movement patterns. We're going to do some sort of horizontal push and pull, some sort of vertical or vertical-ish push or pull. Vertical-ish meaning, with the shoulder issues that a lot of jiu-jitsu players have, they might not be able to go completely overhead, but we're going to do some sort of, landmine or incline variation, something like that. Some sort of squatting pattern. May not be a back squat or, but something, a bilateral squat, some sort of hinge, and then maybe I might include some like supplemental, like accessory, like isolation or single joint exercises in there. So, it could be biceps, triceps, leg extension, leg curl, neck
Yeah.
extension, neck flexion, lateral flexion, whatever.
Have you seen any exercises that translate really well to BJJ, like something unconventional like a Zercher squat, or not really?
Mm, no, not necessarily. I think like Zercher squats have gotten like they've blown up over the last few years on Instagram, and I personally like them. I'm not a great back squatter uh, due to my leverages, but when I put the bar on the crook of my elbows, like squatting feels really good. So I like the Zercher squat. I haven't done it much recently, but I'm not doing it for carryover to jujitsu at all. It's purely because it's a squatting pattern that feels good for me, um, and it allows me to utilize more weight or as much weight as a back squat with seemingly less, well, I guess, lower back involvement. I mean, that's to be determined. There's a lot of infighting, right, on the internet of
Lots of
whether it's a
physics.
hinge or a squat, and it's like whatever, do whatever squat you like. But
Yeah.
no, I don't think there's any one lift that necessarily carries over to jujitsu. Having said that, if a client or somebody wanted to work with me and they're like, I mean, I might have this type of conversation, very candid, and be like, there's no real lifts in the gym that are going to carry over to, or I might just, if they're like, they just want to hear what I'm going to tell them, then I'm going to say, yeah, fucking Zercher squats are going to carry over to your, like, if that means you're going to do them kind of thing, or whatever you name the lift, right?
Hmm.
Um, I just think being able to, I don't, I don't necessarily, I don't know how to say this without being able to move well, whatever that means for you. It doesn't necessarily mean need to like pass certain table tests or anything like that. But can you squat and it look like a squat? Can you hinge and it looks like a hinge? Uh, you know, can you move your shoulder blade? Can your shoulder blades move in like a horizontal, like a push up or something? Like I want to see those kinds of things,
Hmm.
and I think that will have more carryover than um, hey, I'm attacking this one lift or this one movement because I think it's gonna, carry over to my jujitsu. Because we could say like, oh, a weighted pull up, but if your elbows are fucked because of jujitsu, like you're not gonna have a great weighted pull. Like, so there has to be alternatives built in there. I'm picking on the pull up as an example, but
Hmm.
hopefully you can kind of see where I'm coming from.
Yeah, definitely. And because I know you can have like a little bit of a based on what I've seen on Instagram, some sort of like Bill Hartman, Zach Couples kind of influence. And is that correct?
Very little.
Pat.
I
Okay.
very, very little. Like Pat Davidson is somebody who
Okay.
all right, going back to like maybe 2018 to around that 2018, 2019, I found Kyle Dobbs online. So, on Instagram, I don't know if you follow at Compound Performance. Took him on, or he took me on in a more of like a coaching, like mentorship role at that time. And
Yeah.
I was introduced to like Pat Davidson, went to a couple of Pat seminars, saw Zach at a seminar. I wouldn't say I'm a PRI guy at all.
Hmm.
I have very surface level knowledge of all that stuff, uh, what's the saying, like an inch wide and or an inch deep and a mile wide kind of thing. Um, so I know a little bit, enough to talk to somebody who has no idea what I'm talking about and sounds smart, but not with actually anybody who knows what the fuck they're talking about.
Yeah. So when I was just bringing that up because you mentioned like you want to be able to see a good hinge and a good squat. So like
Yeah.
a good squat to you, is that just like a nice vertical pelvic movement based exercise, or is it okay if it translate more horizontal? Or
Yeah, I like.
again, this.
Can somebody do the movement? I guess is my first like prerequisite. Like,
Hmm.
I guess like if you can you do a goblet squat and it look like a goblet squat, and then if you want to load it, whether that's in a zercher or in the back, and you're hinging, I don't really care that much. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Um, it's more of like, hey, can get in a deep hip flexion, and not have you know and not be in pain. Like that's my number one thing. Uh,
Hmm.
if you can low bar back squat. Not that I'm saying that's maybe a great idea for somebody who does jujitsu because of the requisite shoulder mobility needed, but it doesn't cause you pain and you like doing it and you're able to move a lot of weight. Fuck yeah, go like low bar back squat. I don't care. I
Hmm.
think whatever's going to keep you training and excited to train is the best thing for you.
Nice. That's great. Great message. Now I want to kind of transition more into kind of some of the stuff that I see on your Instagram around kind of more athleticism based training. So more like ground based training, more jumping, skipping, bounding, those sorts of things. I think that's something that's kind of not really discussed a whole lot in this space. So how do you incorporate those things into someone's kind of program for being a better athlete and BJJ competitor or
Yeah. So
hobbyist?
I first of all, I've been doing plyometrics or plyometric based training on and off since I don't know, I was a kid, right? Like you go back to kind of the OG of true hybrid training. Do you know who Ross Animate is?
I do not know.
Ross Animate. Do yourself a favor, go on YouTube, look up Ross Animate. This dude's been putting out videos of him doing like he's a boxing strength conditioning coach and a boxing coach out of Connecticut, but he's
Hmm.
kind of the OG. Like he could do all the crazy stuff you see people doing now. He was doing in 2003, like benching double body weight. He could do like crazy plyometrics. Like had all kind like he could do it all, right?
Yeah.
So just going back to like my time, like watching his stuff, I've been doing some form of plyometric training for however long. But obviously, Matt McInnes Watson at Plus Plyos on Instagram, he's kind of taken plyometrics to like a different level and has found a way to categorize it and organize it in a way to like dunce like me could kind of figure out how to program it and have it make sense. So a lot of the stuff that you see me doing is from him, right? And then
Hmm.
other resources around, but he's kind of like he's the goat right now, right?
Hmm.
And my opinion on plyometrics and like sprint work or anything like that is I don't think it's going to make me a better jujitsu athlete, at least not in the immediate term. It's kind of going back to that, like I'm building like an investment portfolio so that when I'm in my 50s or whatever, or I'm 38, so when I'm in my 40s, I'll have like some of that athleticism to like pull back, like to pull from if I need it, right?
Hmm.
I think that's one of the things up until recently, I think plyometrics have gotten a lot more, like again, thanks to Matt McKinnis Watson, in my opinion, they've got a lot more play on Instagram and on social media. I think more people recognize the value there. But in the jujitsu and combat sport world, you weren't seeing that much of it because jiu-jitsu is it's a ground-based sport. You're not hopping around on one leg. You're not. It's not really dynamic, and especially in the gi, right? You're not really moving all that dynamically outside of a scramble. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to maintain some sort of like athleticism or elasticity? And I'm going back to like, I just want to have some semblance of athleticism when I'm, in 15, 20 years from now. I do think it has some payoff now. Like I can, I think I still move pretty well. I think being a better all around athlete, especially if you're like a hobbyist, I think it's just a good idea in general. Like,
Hmm.
kind of pigeonholing yourself, as like I only do jujitsu and I lift weights to get jacked. I think that's fine. You'll do fine. You'll probably crush. If you're good and you're technical and you're strong, you'll crush most people. But I do like being able to move and being able to move well enough. And it's just something that I personally appreciate. So when I'm working with folks, I start them off with like really low level, like extensive style plyometrics to kind of just build um, kind of that resiliency in like the lower leg, like calf, foot, ankle region. So like your basic pogo hops and various split stance pogo hops, lateral pogo hops, things like that. We're like really low level,
Hmm.
just enough sprinkled in to act as like either a warm up before a lifting or a conditioning session, or
Hmm.
sometimes as a cool down even. It's not technically a cool down, but like at the end of a session, uh, and not super high volume, just because most folks haven't been privy to any of that kind of stuff, so they don't need a lot. They just need kind of like a minimal effective dose to get quite a bit of benefit. And also, my clients aren't me. Like I might do 20 minutes or 25 minutes worth of plows in a session, or as an example, because I might have a non-jujitsu related goal that I'm working towards or something like that.
Hmm.
But I understand most people don't. So I don't program super high volumes there. Literally just enough to, 5 to 10 minutes worth to scratch that itch, get them primed and ready. And then, not that I necessarily believe in like a progression model for plyometrics. And that's another thing Matt McKinnis Watson has kind of helped show us, is that you don't necessarily need to like have this strict progression model per se, as much as just exposing people to different movement patterns, different varieties of different options, single leg, double leg, and just kind of, for lack of a better term, like making it almost like a brain game, and giving a different stimuli than they otherwise would never get in jujitsu or in a strength session, right?
Hmm. Definitely, that makes great sense. And I'm just thinking about the brain games part. Like, as most people age too, like they're at a risk of developing dementia, and like
Right.
the thing that people prescribe is like dancing and kickboxing and things that just like
Yeah.
require you to think. So it makes great sense. I thought that, I guess, if you had like an athlete who does more martial arts, the plows could maybe be potentially more beneficial for them, just for like striking sports on their
Yeah,
feet and
boxing,
whatnot.
kickboxing,
Boxing.
absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm.
You just don't see it now you're seeing more of like these more yielding based, or like what's called like deep tier plyometrics come into play, where you're kind of in these low squatty positions. I think those are super valuable
Yep.
because you'll find yourself in those positions quite frequently in jiu-jitsu. And I think it's just more of like a preventative measure for knee and ankle health. And so you can get some little bit of a metabolic effect, aerobic training effect, doing that kind of stuff, which is another reason why I like plyometrics. It's a way to make aerobic work less boring. So
Hmm.
a typical like aerobic session is I might have them start off with, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes worth of plyometrics. So let's say 10 minutes of conditioning right there. They might do another 5 minute warm up on the bike, 10 minutes of tempos, another five. You know what I mean? So it's a way to accumulate time
Yep.
in kind of that whatever zone you want to use
Yep.
heart rate.
I want to get in. I just want to ask a little more specifics. This is just for myself. I'm just interested in learning a little bit more about the yielding plyometrics versus the extensive ice. Ex, yeah, yielding and extensive
Yep.
plyometrics. Can we talk about the difference between those two?
Yeah. So again, my explanation here is not going to be as good as like as the experts in this, but so your
Hmm.
yielding plyometrics are going to be where you are essentially getting like eccentric overload, right? So think of like your standard, you've seen like frog jumps or like a split lunge jump, right? Like common movements that you would go into any like group exercise class, like in your big gym, right? And you'll see like the instructor like bouncing around doing that. Like that kind of stuff is actually pretty good, right? And it's you're not only you're exposing your tissues to that level of eccentric force, and you're getting you're teaching your body how to like rebound, for lack of a better term, out of those positions.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting a little bit of a metabolic training effect, as I mentioned previously, just because your heart rate's going to be elevated. There's those work to rest ratios. Um, you're getting a little bit of like you're getting into deeper ranges of motion. Like
Mm-hmm.
if somebody can't get into a great squat, like doing some squatty plyos are like I found to just be mint. Like you know what I mean? Your hips and knees and ankles are going to feel awesome after
Mm-hmm.
doing that type of work, right? So, that type of stuff will make you very sore. So you definitely want to start with like relatively low volumes and slowly increase either the frequency or volume of that type of work. But it's just a great way, in my opinion, to either warm up before a session or finish a session as like a little finisher, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's one of those things where it's like you kind of keep in the toolbox. Like I find if I'm not doing that stuff as frequently, like when I go back to it, I'm super sore, and it's just a little reminder to just keep it in at like a low level constantly. And then if you have a specific goal where maybe it requires more volume there, then you increase the volume. Not a great explanation, but I hope that helps. You're
Was that
essentially
was that the explanation for both of
no.
the
So that's for
types?
the yielding. Your
Yeah.
more extensive plyometrics are going to be like this would be like your single leg hops, your pogo jumps, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We are, and also I'm forgetting a key point. So in a typical like yielding so going back, a typical yielding plyometric, it's not a true plyometric in the sense that it's just too slow. You know what I mean? So it's technically not a plyometric, but we're calling it one just for the sake of categorization, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
Whereas an extensive plyometric, where you're doing multiple jumps, right, and
Mm-hmm.
it's that fast rebound off the ground. Uh, uh, Forgive me, I don't recall how many meters per second it actually needs to be a plyometric, but the number's out there somewhere. I should know, but anyway, so you're getting that fast rebound effect. You're almost popping off the ground, and there's ways to increase the intensity there or decrease the intensity there. But the key being that it's a repetitive motion, right? So a box jump would not be a plyometric because that's just a single jump. A broad
Mm-hmm.
jump is not a plyometric. It's just a single jump, which is fine. It's just different terminology, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which a third category of plyometrics would be more your intensive uh, variations, where these would be like rather than like a low level extensive where you could do like 10, 20, 30 repetitions, you might do 2, 3, 4, 5 repetitions. And that would be like your hurdle hops, your broad jumps, that kind of or continuous broad jumps, those kinds of things.
That would
Uh,
be the intensive.
that would be the intensive. So more stimulating from a
Yeah.
nervous system perspective. If you've ever done like really high effort, all out, like continuous broad jumps, like super fatiguing. You wouldn't do a ton of volume. Like you're keeping the reps and total volume or total workload relatively low,
Mm-hmm.
and you would want to do that when you're fresh, obviously, right? Versus
Yeah.
the extensives. Yeah, you can do them when you're fresh. You can also do them under fatigue, and you can vary the amplitude of those movements depending on your goal. So, like a lower amplitude, more of a true extensive would be to like work on like rhythm and timing and those kinds of things. Think of like jumping rope, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus like you can increase the amplitude, and now you're getting into more like force development, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Good stuff. Yeah, those explanations were awesome. Thanks, man.
I
I
hope
want.
so. I would check out his podcast and his work just to maybe get better clue in on that. But hopefully that helped.
Yeah, I'm gonna want to kind of wrap things up now, just by finishing off with like the loaded term of injury prevention, because I guess like injuries are very prevalent in martial arts, BJJ. So, do you have any like thoughts or ideas around what's like some of the best practices in terms of keeping healthy, in terms of practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
Yeah. So I've had a lot of thoughts about this recently because of my recent injury, and not that it's been debilitating. I've been able to train, and maybe to my own detriment, but I've continued to train and train through it. but it made me kind of rethink like where I maybe could have been doing a better job, right? So we could
Yep.
say that injuries are always a freak occurrence, right? So I was in this instance, I shot I believe a double leg, and my training partner sprawled out on top of me, and I tore the same labrum 20 years ago, so knock on wood, haven't had any issues really since then and up until that point.
Yep.
But this was at a 6 a.m. training session. I probably, if I were to look back at that day, probably didn't have maybe the greatest sleep the day prior or the days prior. So maybe I went into that training session a little bit more fatigued than I normally would have. And I
Mm-hmm.
think fatigue plays a role in not only decision making, but like in coordination and timing and all those other aspects that go into that. So I think that's my roundabout way of saying like get your lifestyle in order to the best way, to the best degree that you can, right? So I have
Mm-hmm.
2 kids, but who both sleep through the night, and I don't really have any issues there. But it's like the more you have on your plate, the more likely like your lifestyle is gonna like influence your training, right?
Mm-hmm.
So handle the basic stuff. Get your sleep in order, get your nutrition somewhat in order, stress management, all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the next most important thing is just manage your training load. Like, don't train like an asshole. Like, if you're if you're 38 years old and you have other responsibilities outside of just training, it probably behooves you to, maybe you don't take on the same training load as the 25-year-old who like lives in his mom's basement. He trains twice a day, and I mean, it's just right. Everybody's in a different scenario. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Like I remember being
Yep.
that guy too, and just having all the time in the world to train, and looking at like the older guys and be like snickering, like basically like, come on, man, get it together. And now that I'm a little bit older, I don't think my recovery ability has necessarily like decreased all that much. It's just I have other shit to do, right? So it kind of, things
Mm-hmm.
kind of fall in line that way. So manage your training load. Like number one, I think it's important to obviously like not only looking at the microcycle in terms of your training week, like where are you having easier days, where are you having harder days, and really recognizing like what's your weekly pattern look like or your daily pattern, in terms of training. If every day is, you roll as hard as you can, you get in the gym and you train as hard, like great. I guess David Goggins is right. Somebody's got to carry the boats. Maybe you're that guy, but probably not. And you're probably better off taking a look and taking a step back, recognizing that you're going to get more quality training in if you kind of delineate your days accordingly, and you have days that are designated to be maybe a little bit harder, days that are designated to be a little bit easier. You have maybe even full rest days. Oh my God. Like, and you kind of look at your training week in that manner. And a training week doesn't necessarily need to be 7 days, right? You could have a 10-day microcycle, a 14-day microcycle, whatever the case is.
Yeah.
And I like people to really take that step back and look at like a month overall. People get so caught up in the week, like, oh, I got to get this many sessions in this week. And this, especially like type A type athletes that are, they take their training seriously. They love it more than anything. Take a step back and look at 30 days. And if you zoom out, you're like, okay, like, yeah, it makes sense. Like I maybe in one week I get 2 hard sessions, but the next week I only get one really hard session. But you might get 3 or 4 easier ones, right? So the total volume is always kind of at this baseline, but
Yep.
you're not getting these like really peaks and troughs of like where you're crushing yourself, and then you have to take time off because you've gotten injured or you've gotten sick, whatever the case might be. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so manage your training load both in jiu-jitsu and in your strength and conditioning. I think that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can't, don't rob Peter to pay Paul. So if you love jiu-jitsu and that's your main priority, you probably maybe aren't going to follow the same strength conditioning program that somebody follows literally because that's their hobby. They love strength conditioning, so their program is reflective of that versus you use it as a supplement to your jiu-jitsu, as a
Mm-hmm.
generality, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so if you can avoid getting injured and you can avoid getting sick, which if somebody doesn't have kids, they might not understand this. When you have 2 young kids and they're in daycare, like they are walking little petri dishes. So I didn't realize how big of a deal this was again until like this year. So I have a 4-year-old and I have a 10-month-old, right, or an almost 10-month-old.
Yeah.
They're both in daycare all day, so they come home with all those little kids, little germs and sicknesses, and yeah, our house is just basically like the house of sickness. like if you're not careful. So if you're not handling your stuff outside of the gym, and you're not managing your sleep and your nutrition, all that, like that's how you get into issues where you get sick, you take time off, you try to jump right back into the same amount of training you were doing before you got sick and you took time off. That's where it becomes an issue. So kind of like going back to this idea of like always maintaining a base level of fitness, I think is a great idea. So that way you're never having the again those huge peaks and valleys where it's like you're playing catch up right to where you were previously and you're trying probably to do too much too soon, or you're feeling like you're just always like behind and you're never putting in the same quality of work that you need to in order to actually get better. Because at the end of the day, jiu-jitsu is still like it's yes, it's a rough, it can be a rough sport. It's a physical sport. You need to be in shape, you need to be strong, all these things, but it still falls back on like how are you at jiu-jitsu? You know what I mean? Like how technical are you? And the more technical and efficient you are, the more you can train and not get fucked up because you're not relying on these other physical attributes.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. No, that was a great answer. And I like how you didn't like go into like specific exercises necessarily to prevent injuries. You kind of looked at more of the principles that are going to allow you just to do more training more consistently and be healthier. So that was a great answer, man.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
So we're going to wrap things up. It was great having you on. I know we had some difficulties early on, but
we figured it out.
We figured it out, definitely. And I want people to know where they can find you and reach out to you for coaching. So do you mind just giving us some of your contact information?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. No, I'm kidding. I'm on LinkedIn and I keep getting these notifications, like, but I don't look at it ever. No, I'm on Instagram at my name, so at Dustin Dustin Lebel Lebel. All my stuff is on there. I've been posting on Instagram for a long time. I try to put out useful content. I haven't been posting as much lately because I'm just not. I don't know.
Not in the mood.
I just a lot of the content that you see, like I just don't want to repeat what other people are saying, so I'm just taking a step back and trying to post maybe less frequently, but maybe more impactful stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm on Threads too, I guess, but if you're on Instagram, you can probably find me on Threads. It's pretty easy to do. But yeah. That's it.
Well, I've been following. I don't even know how I came across Dustin, but ever since I've been following him, he definitely posts a lot of gems in terms of strength and conditioning knowledge and just overall kind of philosophy around training and MMA and BJJ. So I highly recommend everyone check him out. And you're doing coaching right now, right?
Yeah, yep. So coaching is not my full-time job. It was for a long time, but I keep a relatively small roster of clients. I am accepting new clients going into the new year, but not having it be my full-time job is actually way less stressful, and I enjoy it way more at this point in time. So I'm happy to work with anybody that has any interest. So yeah, thank you for the shout out there. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries, man. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, likewise, man. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
All right, take care. Bye.